Now, we will move forward to our next very interesting presentation on Big Data and Cloud Computing, Drive Transformation in Financial Services by Mr. Rajesh Balakrishnan, who is the Regional Sales Manager for Hortonworks. So I would request Mr. Rajesh to please come on stage and take the charge and enlighten us with his technology to us. A huge round of applause for Mr. Rajesh.
And lunch, so which is something that's been happening with some of the presentation sessions that I've been doing consistently. So just to give you a perspective, I think there have been quite a number of presentations that have been done from morning. Just a quick check, how many of you have heard about Hortonworks before? Okay. So I guess the hands a few. Okay. So just giving you, a perspective of what Hortonworks is and why it has a relevance in today's BFSI space. Big data and analytics is something, if you were to trace it back, I think it's in a similar wave as what your cloud was about a decade back. Data existed, I think they existed in silos. Biggest challenge customers had is that how do I convert this data into actionable intelligence, or what you may want to call it as predictive analytics, which will allow us to make insightful decisions for the business. Now, that's why we bring in a big value proposition. So, a quick run through about what Hortonworks is. We're an American company. We were founded in year 2011. We went public in year 2013. We are about 1,000 plus customers worldwide. And in India, we have a large presence based out of Bangalore. Unlike the large MNCs where you typically only have a sales organization, in India we have a product development and a customer support team which is based out of Bangalore. Now, what are the solutions that we offer? Essentially, we offer solutions under the brand name called as Hortonworks Open Connected Data Platforms. So, in the broader sense, what it means is that we can do analytics of both data at rest and data in flow. If you look at the, just a quick check in terms of, if you go to our website, which is www.hortonworks.com, the vision as a company that we have is to manage the world's data. We follow the open source model, So from an open source model perspective, what we do is we create, we manage, and we distribute enterprise-wide open data platforms and modern data applications. Just taking 2 steps backwards from all the eminent speakers that were there today morning, all of them were talking about the speed of innovation. And I'm sure everybody in this forum would agree to the fact that, there is no other community than open source which brings in the speed of innovation. Now, if you look at some of the key foundations that we built our entire product portfolio, they are completely on the open source model. By open source model, what I mean is we closely work with around 1,600 plus partners who develop applications in the community space. We contribute to the development of the applications. We test it, we certify it, and then we offer it to you in the form of a subscription. Now, what does the subscription guarantee, which I think is very important, because the biggest challenge I think customers have always seen with the open source world is that, is open source secure? Is open source scalable? Is open source reliable for me to deploy it in a business critical production system? The answer is yes. As we go through the slides, I will also run you through, with the limited time that has been provided to us, through some of the use cases that we've done and some of the large customers that we address across the globe, to give you the confidence that open source model today has matured enough that customers can move ahead and move their business critical workloads on the open source environment. From a Hortonworks perspective, like I said, open source, we are one of the largest contributors to the Apache Foundation. And under the Apache Foundation, there is something called as Open Data Platforms Initiative. Why, the reason why I'm talking about open source and the Apache Foundation is that every large company that operates in the space, I'm not going to name them, but all large companies are part of the Apache Foundation and the Open Data Platform Initiative. Because what companies have felt in the proprietary world is that beyond a point, scalability is a challenge. And that scalability can only be achieved, scalability, security, reliability, and innovation can only come through the open source world. I've spoken of this earlier as well. From an end customer, what are the benefits that open source can bring me? I think one of the biggest challenge I think customers have today, no customer likes to be in a situation of vendor lock-in. Open source eliminates vendor lock-in completely. Two, like I said, because the entire development methodology is community-based, you stand to gain at the speed of innovation that happens. And from a larger perspective, we work very closely with the ecosystem, because at the end of the day, if we are to provide you reliable, production-led, trouble-free environments, then what is important is the ecosystem. Now, this is what I said in the beginning. We offer something called as open connected data platforms. So as you would see in the slide, our ability to capture data from different streams exists. If you look at it in the traditional world, earlier data used to be generated by machines. Then you used to have human-generated data. Today, that has moved away to IoT, social data. Now, what customers expect today is, what the data explosion has been so large that one of the biggest challenges that you have is one is to capture the data. Now, once I capture the data, how do I convert this data to give me actionable intelligence or real-time analytics? That's precisely what we do. We do that with a combination of two products, as indicated in the slide. One is called as data flow, and one is called as data platform. Essentially, one is data at rest, another one is data in flow. Just going a step backwards, if you would look at in the big data space, what has happened is data explosion has been one of the biggest things that has happened. In the traditional world, if you've looked at, earlier we had our ERP systems in place, then we had CRMs have come in, and today big data has come in. Now, what big data has brought in is a huge data explosion that has brought in. So one of the analysts states that by year 2020, we're talking of about 44 zillion bytes of data. That's a huge volume of data. Now, one is the challenge customers would have is, how do I capture all this data? And once I capture all this data, how am I going to convert this to give me actionable intelligence? Now, since this is a seminar around banking, I think it would make a lot of relevance in terms of what are the use cases that a typical bank would face. If you look at the segments of banking that we've looked at broadly, I think these are all areas which banks would look at. Capital markets, your retail banking, your stock exchanges, your wealth and asset management. And at the end of the day, I think the real benefit of a technology lies in if you're able to bring in a business value. Now, what are the focus areas that banks would look at around the space? One is risk management. A typical risk management is something like this. You have a customer walking into a bank, and he is applying for a loan. How do you establish the creditworthiness of a customer? Now, the window that you have for approving the loan is probably 10 or 15 minutes. The reality being that today, there are, the competition in the banking space has become large. Earlier in India, we had only public sector banks. Today, we have large of private banks also operating. So how do you ensure that you bring in an improved turnaround time to the customer? So that's something that happens around risk management. The second biggest use case, I think, which is becoming very, very relevant is, how do I upsell to my existing customers? Now, today, my data is captured in 20 different systems. How do I bring all of them to a single unified view and then do an analytics which can give me an output which says, these are the other plans that I could look at upselling a customer. Anti-money laundering, fraud detection, I think these are other areas where the Reserve Bank of India is making it a mandate to ensure that the customer's interest is protected. So these are typically some of the use cases that we have implemented with large banking and financial customers across the globe. Now, this is an extension to the earlier slide, which talks about the relevance of big data in retail banking and capital markets. So essentially, if you go through this slide, all you would see is that one of the biggest things that have changed today is the data volume, the types of data that have changed, and the need for analytics and reporting have also changed. Last but not the least, I think the biggest challenge customers have today is that business is always asking for more reporting, more functionalities, and your budgets are shrinking. So how do I do more with less? And I think the answer there lies with open source. Now, so this is an extension to what I said earlier. This is typically what we've seen with banks across the globe, where you have disparate systems in place and data being captured in 20 different points in the system. The inability of the current system to do real-time data processing, doing predictive analytics, issues with flexibility, TCO, scalability. These are the typical challenges that you would find in any banking system. Now, this is obviously a seminar on cloud and how does Hortonworks partner in the cloud space. So, from our model perspective, we offer products both on-premise on the cloud. So we have the hybrid model. Our products are available both on the private cloud and the public cloud. And the reason why, the earlier speakers were talking about cloud and the relevance of cloud. I think, traditionally, if you look at it, cloud is probably not the one-stop shop for all solutions. Depending upon the kind of workloads that you want to, or use cases that you may want to call it as, I think it is then a customer needs to take a call, do I need to move into a cloud or not? And the biggest benefits that customers derive by looking at cloud is business agility, yes, the ability to spawn up new infrastructure within a limited time frame. Two, I think in a real practical scenario, what I've seen with customers is that getting capital expenditure, CapEx as you may call it, CapEx budgets are always a difficult task, OpEx is relatively easier, and cloud falls in the OpEx model. And obviously the scalability. Now, if you look at, from a banking perspective, what has changed today? Because if you were to take a step back to how banking was done a decade back, predominantly banking was done essentially, you go into a bank to update your passbook, or you go across the counter to withdraw money or deposit checks. I think from that today, what has moved is that the entire context of social media and mobile, I think, has changed the whole space. So you have people who are interacting through different modes. One. The second thing is, because of the different modes, you have customer expectations have changed. Now, that could be attributed to the increased competition that you have in banks and financial institutions having come into play. I think customers are asking for more. And now with the fact that I said earlier in India, we had only public sector banks operating. Today, you have a combination of both private and public sector banks, so they need to be competitive enough. And last not the least is, everybody talks about social media and analytics, and IoT is something that comes into play. The ability to capture data from different devices. Now I'm just going to talk about a couple of slides about use cases, primarily talking about in the banking space. If you look at it, today, the biggest challenge I think banks have across is that, data is captured across different systems, but how do I convert the data into actionable intelligence? So these are some of the use cases of banks who have done implementation across the globe. One is to create something like a data lake. A data lake is nothing but you create a common platform where all the data moves into one common system, and then from that one common system, you are able to do whatever analytics that you want, like a 360-degree customer awareness or a holistic view of customers, your customer experience management, location-based marketing or campaigns, dynamic digital capabilities. So here you are seeing that versus you having to manage 20 different systems, feeds coming from 20 different applications, you're converging all of them into something called as a big data lake. And this is something, this is a requirement that was predominantly available globally, but we're seeing Indian banks, Indian customers, increasingly feeling the need to look at a big data lake. This gives you an overview perspective of some of the benefits that banks have seen by looking at, by implementing a big data lake. One is you get your ability to respond to customer requests becomes faster, your historical or data analytics becomes faster, fraud analytics becomes faster. Now this talks about the slide that I said earlier. You have different systems within the banking system, all of them feeding different data. The biggest challenge that they have is all data is in isolation. The first thing that banks would like to do to gain business benefit out of it is to converge all of them into something called a data lake. Once you get that into a data lake, the benefit that you get is data lakes can store large volumes of data, and then you pick and choose the kind of analytics that you want to do to support your business. Now, this is a typical use case of analytics in banking, which exists with banks in India as well. We're talking of your risk profiling, you're talking of anti-money laundering, fraud management, cybersecurity, which is very important. Just taking a step backwards, like I said earlier, we had an eminent speaker talking about Aadhaar. Just for an information for everybody, the entire Aadhaar platform has actually been implemented on open source. That means to say, that's, I think, probably among the 2 or 3 large systems, enterprise systems that exist globally today by the sheer volume of users registered and the transactions that you have. And that entire system is a clear example of the kind of scalability, reliability, and security that brings in. So from an open source perspective, yes, all our products support the highest level of security and data encryption as well. This just gives you, so this slide basically gives you a perspective in terms of, open source does not operate in isolation. Because if you see in this slide, just to give you a perspective, all the names that I've mentioned, Spark, HBase, all of them are open source projects. And you'd see we have an ability to do the complete solution, right from streaming to storing the data to doing the analytics and providing it to you in a reported form. Last but not the least, these are some of the requirements you will have from a regulation perspective, both from an operational perspective, compliance, Basel III, your credit risk, market risk. Now, this is a slide essentially that we've picked up from some customers that we've implemented across the globe. Some of them might be relevant to India, some of them may not be relevant to India, but just giving a larger perspective, we have capabilities to support compliance needs as well. Yeah. Now, this is the second last slide that I have. This talks about some of the use cases that we've done for customers across the globe and some of the benefits that customers have gained by deploying a solution. So I come back to my basic question earlier. Technology today cannot exist in isolation. I think unless and until business sees benefit out of it, these kind of deployments would remain standalone and they would be an isolated deployment. This slide broadly speaks of some of the engagements that we have with banks across the world. You would see we work very closely with 4 of the 5 largest banks worldwide. And we also have deployments and implementation with banks in India as well. So with this, I come to my last slide, which is thank you. Thank you all for the time. And me and my colleagues, Sandeep Soni, are available at the booth. Should you have any questions, clarifications, or any information that you would need from our side, we'd be more than happy to support you. Thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you, Mr. Rajesh, for such an insight, and I would request you to please be on stage. I request Mr. Buchi Babu to please come on stage and thank Mr. Rajesh for coming here with his team and presenting his services to us. Sir, please. A huge round of applause for Mr. Rajesh. His booth is right at the back side, so you are free to contact him for any other more information on his services.